The uterus. Let us begin our discussion with the uterus, a key organ in the female reproductive system. The uterus is a hollow piriform muscular organ, and it's located in the pelvis, precisely between the bladder anteriorly and the rectum. Posteriorly, position of the uterus. Now, regarding its position, the uterus is normally found in a state of anteversion and anteflexion. It typically inclines to the right, a phenomenon known as dextrorotation, which causes the cervix to be directed to the left, a condition termed levitation. This anatomical arrangement brings the cervix into close relation with the left ureter. Measurements and parts. In terms of size, the uterus measures about 8 centimeters in length, 5 centimeters in width at the fundus, and its walls are approximately 1 to 5 centimeters thick. The weight of the uterus can vary, usually between 50 grams and 80 grams. Anatomically, the uterus is divided into 3 main parts: the body or corpus, the isthmus, and the cervix. Body of the uterus. First, the body or corpus. This part is further subdivided. The fundus is the region lying above the openings of the uterine tubes. The body proper is triangular, lying between the openings of the tubes and the isthmus. The superlateral angles of the body project outward at the junction of the fundus and body, and these projections are known as the cornua of the uterus. It's important to note that the uterine tube, the round ligament, and the ligament of the ovary are all attached at this cornual region, isthmus of the uterus. Next, the isthmus, a constricted portion, about 0.5 centimeters in length. It lies between the body and the cervix. It is bounded above by the anatomical internal os and below by the histological internal os, also referred to as Ascoff's internal os. Some anatomists consider the isthmus to be a part of the lower portion of the body of the uterus, cervix of the uterus. Now, the cervix. This part is cylindrical in shape, measuring about 2.5 centimeters. It begins at the isthmus and ends at the external os, which opens into the vagina by perforating its anterior wall. The portion of the cervix above the vagina is termed the supravaginal part, while the part that lies within the vagina is called the vaginal part. Cavity of the uterus. Moving on to the cavity of the uterus. The cavity of the body is triangular in a coronal section, with the base above and the apex below. It measures about 3.5 centimeters. Notably, there is no cavity in the fundus. The cervical canal is fusiform and measures around 2.5 centimeters. Therefore, the total length of the uterine cavity is generally 6.5 to 7 centimeters. Anatomical relations of the uterus. Let's now review the relations of the uterus in its anatomical context. Anteriorly, above the internal os, the uterine body forms the posterior wall of the uterovesical pouch. Below the internal os, it is separated from the base of the bladder by loose areolar tissue. Posteriorly, the uterus is covered with peritoneum and forms the anterior wall of the pouch of Douglas, which often contains coils of intestine. Laterally, the broad ligament, a double fold of peritoneum, attaches here. Between these folds, the uterine artery ascends. The Makenrod's ligament extends from the internal os down to the supravaginal cervix and then to the lateral vaginal wall. About 1.5 centimeters lateral to the internal os, especially on the left side, the uterine artery crosses the ureter here. The artery passes above and in front of the ureter, just before the ureter enters the ureteric tunnel. Uterine structure. Let's now turn our focus to the structural composition of the uterus. We begin by examining the wall of the body of the uterus, which is made up of 3 distinct layers from outside inward. Wall of the uterine body, 3 layers. First, the parametrium. This is the serous coat which invests the entire organ, with the exception of the lateral borders. The peritoneum here is intimately adherent to the underlying muscle tissue. Next, the myometrium. This is the muscular layer, comprising thick bundles of smooth muscle fibers, supported by connective tissue. These fibers are arranged in various directions. However, during pregnancy, we can identify 3 distinct muscle layers: an outer longitudinal layer, a middle interlacing layer, and an inner circular layer. Finally, the endometrium. This is the mucus lining of the uterine cavity. Importantly, there is no submucous layer, which means the endometrium lies directly against the muscle coat. It comprises the lamina propria and surface epithelium. The surface epithelium is made up of a single layer of ciliated columnar epithelium. Now, the lamina propria contains stromal cells, endometrial glands, vessels, and nerves. The glands are simple tubular in form and are lined by mucus-secreting non-ciliated columnar epithelium. These glands penetrate the stroma, and in some cases, they may even extend into the muscle coat. It is this endometrium that undergoes transformation into the decidua during pregnancy structure of the cervix. Now shifting our attention to the cervix. The cervix is composed mainly of fibrous connective tissues. The proportion of smooth muscle fibers is relatively low, averaging 10 to 15%. Only the posterior surface of the cervix bears a peritoneal coat. The mucus coat that lines the endocervix consists of simple columnar cells with basal nuclei. The glands here are lined by non-ciliated secretory columnar cells. The vaginal part of the cervix, in contrast, is lined by stratified squamous epithelium. The squamocolumnar junction, a key landmark, is found at the external os, uterine and cervical secretions. Let us now examine the secretory activity. The endometrial secretion is generally scanty and watery. In contrast, the cervical glands produce a thick, alkaline secretion. This secretion is rich in mucoprotein, fructose, and sodium chloride, of which play vital roles in reproductive physiology. Uterus in relation to peritoneum. Next, we trace the course of the peritoneum as it relates to the uterus. Anteriorly, the peritoneum covering the superior surface of the bladder reflects over the interior surface of the uterus at the level of the internal os. This reflection forms the uterovesical pouch. From here, the peritoneum is firmly attached to the anterior and posterior walls of the uterus, as well as the upper 1/3 of the posterior vaginal wall. From this point, it reflects over the rectum, forming the pouch of Douglas, lateral relations, and ligaments. Laterally, the adherent peritoneum from the anterior and posterior uterine walls becomes continuous, forming the broad ligament. This structure then extends laterally to reach the lateral pelvic walls. At that point, the peritoneal layers reflect to cover the anterior and posterior aspects of the pelvic cavity. Notably, on the superior free border of the broad ligament lies the fallopian tube. On the posterior layer, the ovary is attached via the mesotherium. The lateral 1/4 of this free border forms the infundibulopelvic ligament, vascular supply of the uterus. Let us now consider the blood supply of the uterus, beginning with the arterial supply. Arterial supply. The blood supply is from the uterine arteries, one on each side. The artery arises directly from the anterior division of the internal iliac, or in common with the superior vesical artery. Other arterial sources include the ovarian and vaginal arteries, with which the uterine arteries anastomose veins. The venous channels correspond to the arterial course and drain into the internal iliac veins, lymphatic drainage of the uterus. Next, we focus on the lymphatic drainage, which varies depending on the part of the uterus involved. Body. 1. From the fundus and upper part of the body of the uterus, the lymphatics drain into preaortic and lateral aortic groups of glands. 2. The cornu drains to the superficial inguinal gland along the round ligament. 3. The lower part of the body drains into external iliac groups, cervix, on each side. The lymphatics drain into 1. External iliac, obturator lymph nodes either directly or through paracervical lymph nodes, 2. Internal iliac groups, and 3. Sacral groups, nerve supply of the uterus. Let us now turn to the innervation of the uterus. Nerves. The nerve supply of the uterus is derived principally from the sympathetic system and partly from the parasympathetic system. Sympathetic components arise from T5 and T6 motor and T10 to L1 spinal segments sensory. The somatic distribution of uterine pain corresponds to that area of the abdomen supplied by T10 to L8. The parasympathetic system is represented on either side by the pelvic nerve, which consists of motor and sensory fibers from S to S3 and S4, ending in the ganglia of Frankenhauser. The cervix is insensitive to touch, heat, and also when it is grasped by any instrument. Likewise, the uterus is also insensitive to handling and even to incision over its wall. Embryological development of the uterus. And finally, a quick look at uterine development. The uterus is developed from the fused vertical part of the two Müllerian ducts